All right, we are now officially recording. So what I just want to clarify a little bit in Rav Kook's own words. We had this idea, we had this triangle, if you remember. We have what we call the secular and the holy, the Kodesh and the Chol, if you remember, as a base next to each other. And then above that we had the Kache Kachim, kind of what we call the supernal holy is the phrase that he uses. And I wanted to better clarify for us a little bit that understanding. And this will also kind of flow over a little bit into, we talk a little bit about Rav Kook's view of science a little bit. And for that, allow me to share a little bit of Kabbalah with you about how the Kabbalists see the world. The Kabbalists see the world as, in many ways, a nesting of levels of holiness. Sfirot play into this, different kavanot, and there are emanations that emanate down in a kind of relay from one sfira to the next. What happens, though, ultimately, on the one hand, and one of the things that, again, in the Nefesh HaChaim that I've been saying with Rabbi Morris, talks about is the problem of pantheism. It's very easy as a Jew to almost see pantheism as God is everywhere, but the truth is God is in reality. That's okay. In reality, God is nowhere, right? He's everywhere, but he's nowhere because we can't place God in the world. In other words, it's almost like we can't. It's beyond our realm of understanding. It's a difference between Hashem Elokeinu, which represents God in the physical world, right? God in law, right? We talk about Elokeinu. We talk about God as din, right? That's Elokeinu. Hashem Elokecha. Hashem is God in his divine mercy. That's God in his beyond our capacity to really understand. We can never really fully get there. The person who came closest was whom? Moshe Rabbeinu, and even he couldn't get a full understanding of the essence of God. None of the other prophets came a little closer, but could really understand God as he truly is. But we have Elokim, that's God. From the Elokim emanates everything that's in this world, in this kind of series of nesting. It's nefesh, neshama, and ruach. Nefesh, ruach, neshama. It's very Kabbalistic, but what ultimately is once we get that level of understanding that everything in this world emanates from kind of that other side, there's like that dome, if you will, that we can't get beyond to fully understand God, and everything within that dome of what we call the universe, physical and metaphysical universe, that's what we can understand, we can comprehend. We can comprehend Elohim, we can comprehend all these emanations, but even though God is everywhere and fills everything, it's not God. God is beyond all of that. That's not God. And we can never fully understand God. Okay, so that's on one foot kind of what we have to understand to now understand that we have this idea of Kodesh and Chol. Now, we said there should be harmony between Kodesh and Chol. What does that mean? What does that mean there should be harmony between Kodesh and Chol? And then what is the difference between Kodesh and Chol? And when are they at each other, and when are they supporting each other? So the simple answer is the harmony is when they're both ultimately working towards the goal from the perspective of the Kodesh Elyon, from that more elevated, not the supremely elevated, but the more elevated level, right, of Kache Kachim, of that supernal holiness, that they're all working towards what? A particular goal. So let me give you an example. we can look at things that are very mundane, everyday activities. What do? We imbue them with a certain amount of holiness. We try to pull out the holiness, right? Getting up in the morning and going to the bathroom is something that every creature in some way or form has to eliminate, waste. Whether it's a plant, whether it's an animal, whether it's a human being, right? That's whole. But we have the concept of tzniut, of modesty, right? We have a concept of your camp should be, even in a military situation, where you're out on the battlefield. You have a whole parsha that speaks, the parsha Shoftim, that speaks about, even if you have to have a shovel in the army. Why? You have to dig a latrine. You have to cover it over. We have the idea of saying Asher Yatzar. We have a prayer that we say, thanking God that we're able to take in and eliminate what we need to, and that all of our organs and veins and vessels all work properly, right? That's whole working towards, right? Working in concert with Kadosh, with the holiness. That's also the pulling out that we talked about, that Rav Kook spoke about in many of the lectures, about bringing out that holiness that's in everything in the world. Now, on the other side of that, even within the holy, the mundane can be very attractive. If we didn't have Shabbat, if I didn't have Shabbat, I would never be able to put down my phone. I would never not be able to answer the phone. I'm not, those that hang around with me, have had a meeting with me, right? I can't turn off my phone. It's hard for me to really put it out of sight. Some of you are probably frustrated when you meet with it at that very idea, right? But because of Shabbat, I'm able to overcome that draw, just like there's a draw of holiness, there's a draw of chol, right? And so Shabbat helps me to not constantly be drawn into that. So while there's a pull from both the holy, at the same time, right? Rituals are holy, right? The idea of keeping kosher, or going to minyan, or getting a lulav and etrog, right? Those are rituals that are basically, right? And there's not really much chol associated with it. They're holy activities. So when we are kind of all working in the same direction, that's good. When are they? Now, we talked about the concept of havdalah and hafrada. You're just like, are you not tracking with me, or you're not buying what I'm saying?
Well, I just feel like you gave a bad analogy,
okay.
Because not answering the phone on Shabbat, that's not whole in the holy.
How about not being able to not do business?
No, those are just things that you don't do. The example you gave of making something mundane holy, you're not giving an equal example on the other side, so I'm just wondering if there is one, or maybe there just isn't.
Well, giving up the holiness, for example, Shabbat is holy, whether Shabbat is a holy day. Shabbat is Shabbat whether I observe it or not.
Yeah.
So the example would be is if I am drawn after the secular, right? So we want to pull the holiness into the whole, but we want to not let the whole be drawn into the holy.
Okay, now I got it.
Right.
Good.
So so for me it's the phone. For other people it's not being able to not check the stock market, or not make the next deal, right? Or not sit next to the person at the shul and talk about all of those things. So they're negatives of each other. If you remember, they're kind of negatives, but a negative put together, you get the picture, right? There's the positive and the negative side of things. But when they're in harmony, they're each able to do what they're supposed to do. The holy is supposed to keep us from being drawn into, at the times and places where we're supposed to be doing ritual or observing Zeralacha, we're not seduced by the whole, which has an attractive pull on us at times, because it's part of our world. Again, when it's in harmony, it's part of our world. But it's not a bad thing, but it's a bad thing at that time or at that place. That's when we're able to keep the holy appropriately, and when we're able to keep the whole focused on something positive and not just being. So what were we going to say?
Well, the impression I got from Betsy was actually looking at it a little bit different, in that the in that the whole, where we bring the Kedusha with the whole during the week, that you're keeping in touch with your congregants, you're helping people, you're using the phone for a Kodesh purpose, and so that's part of.
So
what's
that's
going
also
on.
that's using the Monday
because the whole then
utilizing.
has to be put aside in order to go into the Kodesh for Shabbos. Then that whole thing gets put aside.
Okay. So there's a harmony. There's kind of a unity of purpose. So what's the danger? So there's two types of danger. One is, going back to our very first class, when the tree loses its taste, right? When we don't see the holiness in the tree, we don't see the goal within the tree itself. When we don't see in the whole that there's kedusha to be had there, right? It's just for its own purpose, for its own. That's the end, is the secular, and there is no spiritual side to it. So that's when we have to make a certain type of differentiation. That's when when the whole has separated itself, made a break from the Kodesh, and says there's no Kodesh to be had here. That's when we have a problem. So, for example, he uses this to answer what for me has always been a very difficult part of the Torah, which is the commandment to wipe out the Canaanite nations, right? Wipe them out. They can't. So the way that Rav Kook kind of understands that is other nations, just by not being Jewish, right? Not being part of Am Segula, not being part of Am Kadosh, not being part of Am Yisrael, is not a bad thing. It does not make you bad or invaluable. Unless you are a nation that is so corrupt and rejecting of all the principles of basic humankind, the Shiva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, you have no sense of justice, you have a sense of spirituality, there's nothing there, and that's apparently what these seven, that's why God took, right, the first Rashi in Bereshit, why God took the land from the Canaanites and gave it to us, wasn't just he liked us better, but they were so corrupt, they were so not within the realm of what we would consider to be normative humanity, right? That now it's not there's a break there. There's no harmony. So now we have to do battle, so to speak. There's a difference. That's where we go from Havdalah, distinction, right? Understanding Chol's role. I can distinguish. Chol has a certain role, right? The mundane, the secular has a certain role to play. And it's part of the big picture. And Kedusha has a certain role to play, and they play it together. Again, looking from the top down what the ideal should be, that's good. But we have to know the distinction between them. That's Havdalah. Kodesh is in Chol, and Chol is in Kodesh. They both. But when the Chol so separates itself that it no longer sees any value, no spiritual value, no Kedusha, then there's a Hafrada. It has to be separated out. That's one side. What's on the other side? When the Kedusha, when the holiness says, I don't need the whole. I don't want the whole. I reject the whole. Then that's also bad. That's also a hafrada. Okay, so you're tracking with me? Now you can see these pieces. So let's just look at it in his own words. Now that I've tried to say it outside, let's take a look inside. So this first page this is from the Orot HaKodesh, from the Orot, and he writes as follows. There is a world of the secular and a world of holiness. Worlds of the secular and worlds of holiness. The worlds contradict each other. Of course, the contradiction is subjective. Man in his limited understanding cannot bridge the gap between holiness and secular and cannot straighten the contradictions. They resolved in the height of the world and the place of the Holy of Holies. Okay, so what's he saying here? You now have the language to understand this. What is he saying here? They are resolved in the height of the world and the place of the Holy of Holies.
I mean, stepping back, the contradiction is subjective. The contradiction is our limited understanding that we see a contradiction there. But in truth, it's all one because it all comes from the one source.
we can't always see, looking either way, can't always see the value going both ways and how it works together. But if we're able to elevate ourselves to that perspective of the Kodesh HaKodashim, right, that elevated level at top of the pyramid, right, if we're able to get ourselves up there, right, then we can see it, or God can see it, and maybe we can never fully appreciate it. Okay, that's step number one. Let's look what he says in Mamre Hari'iyah. The world suffers. The world suffers from the mixture of Chol and Kodesh without order. This leads to mutual opposition between the two foundations. Right? He calls them both foundations. The Chol against the Kodesh and vice versa. And this opposition also leads to confusion of ideas until it becomes very difficult at times to discern what is Chol and what is Kodesh. What is Chol and what is Kodesh? All the labors of the wise of the nation must be concentrated on discerning these two foundations from which together the world is built. Human society is established, and all longings will be uplifted. To discern their special boundaries and values, and where each one is to be used, and when they must be separate, each one in its boundaries, and when they must be unified for the overall benefit. Okay, so in other words, it takes, the word here is chachma. It takes a certain amount of chachma, of insight and wisdom, to be able to take a look and see, this has value, this doesn't. This should be pursued, this should be supported, this should be uplifted, this should not. And as I mentioned, it goes both ways. It's not just the Kodesh or the Chol. It goes both ways. There are times when the Kodesh is out of control, so to speak, or not being utilized properly, and sometimes the Chol as well.
And to me, the language really goes back to creation in terms of establishing the boundaries and the separateness of the various elements and things.
Right. Correct. And by the way, we'll see this again when we talk about science. The one thing that Rav Kook distinguished Rav Kook, certainly from his contemporaries, was he did not view the world only from inside the four walls of the Beit Midrash. He didn't only look at it from good for the Jews, bad for the Jews. I mean, in a broader sense, yes. Or, he was able to appreciate the other for its intrinsic value. He was able to look at things and see that there's value. His baseline was, there's value here. I'll share with you one thing in a few minutes about that.
But his view was that both can work together to achieve a synthesis.
Correct.
But
not only could, but really
should.
Need to.
Yeah, to advance society. But that's what put him in opposition to so many others in the issue at that time.
Yes.
So I'm not sure he succeeded. Is I guess what my
no,
problem
I don't know
is.
that. Well, he did and he didn't. He didn't get to see the fruits of his efforts. But again, it all comes back. The insight here is you can see how. Right. Just think about it again. Whenever you want to try to, what is he saying? Think about the settlers and the Yeshuv, right? The religious Jews of the time who were in Israel, who were had the Beit Midrash and the Yeshivot, and the settlers, the new Zionist settlers who came over, saw before World War II, that came over in late 19th century, right? And how they were being rejected by the religious. That was the Kodesh rejecting the Chol, and how many of the settlers some saw their mission as a spiritual mission. They didn't do it in religious terms, but it was a spiritual mission. They are reestablishing Zion, that level. But then there were those who didn't see that at all. It was a matter of Jewish survival. We need Jewish autonomy for Jewish survival, and they saw no spirituality. So and there were religious people who did value the settlers. So just within that, you have all these combinations of what he's trying to express here. Right there, you have the Kodesh and the Chol both working towards the same goal from different perspectives, and you have them at each other at the same time.
So, and to me, I'm wondering whether the talking about a synthesis actually helps set up the contradiction, because it says the contradiction is subjective, because that it's not as much that these are two separate things that are trying to be melded together, but they're part of a whole that we view from separate viewpoints and somehow separate them in our own minds. And so when we try to just bring them together, then sometimes it's more difficult than if we realize they're a whole and seeing how they should be working together.
So right, so he's addressed that by saying he's saying, listen, this isn't easy. This isn't easy, as simplified as I made it. This is why he says it requires chachma, because even within, like, what do you accept and what do you reject? I mean, I think about it, again, Rabbi Saul Berman, for me, really hit home with me on this, on the whole idea of modern orthodoxy. Modern orthodoxy when I was a kid versus, when, I guess, we're all pretty much of a generation where you may not quite fit in, but think about it. When we were kids, the number one TV show was I Love Lucy, right? As being a modern Orthodox Jew and going to the movies and watching TV was not a very big spiritual conflict, right? Mm-hmm. Couples didn't sleep even in the same bed if they slept in the same bedroom, right? It was all very tsanua. That was not a problem. But at the particular time that I had this conversation with Saul Berman was already when I think Sex and the City was the number one show on TV. And it's only gotten worse since that, right? Mm-hmm. Now it's not so easy. I tell people you have to almost apply, like when you figure out certain social venues or certain movies, you almost have to apply like you would with what food you eat. Is this appropriate to put in my body? Is this appropriate to put before my eyes? Isn't it, right? You have to, it's a whole different level of discretion. Secular society today is very different than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it's much more complicated, right? That whole is much more nuanced than it was at some point in the past.
Which goes to kashrut too.
Correct. And it goes both ways. And it gets both ways. All of a sudden, the minutia of halacha was a lot easier. Everybody ate X 40 years ago. The religious and the less religious and the not religious. Today it's like nobody eats anything, right? So again, it goes both ways. It is, as he said, subjective in time and place. So, but he was trying to really deal with it in his particular era. So, did we read the second one already? We did, yes. Right? Right. So, okay. So, all right, so that's basically it. So the difference is there's a certain amount of chachma that has to be put in place to understand what is havdalah and what is hafrada. Right? We make a havdalah between Shabbat and, right, on Shabbat. We make a havdalah between Kodesh and Chol. We don't reject Kodesh and we don't reject Chol. We don't say, no. Okay, we want to extend Shabbat for a certain amount of time. We don't want to let go of Shabbat, but we don't say, there's a commandment, 6 days, you work, you do malacha. 6 days, you do secular stuff. It's imbued with holiness, but you do secular stuff. We don't reject it. That's havdalah. That's the harmonious relationship. I know what I'm doing. I understand. I have a certain ability to understand what I'm doing now and how to make it not totally secular, but imbue it with some holiness. And now it's all holy, but I got to make sure not to get so caught up in it that I reject, don't go to work or whatever. And then there's hafrada, things that I have to reject because it just doesn't work. It won't fit. It's destructive. Okay. So now I guess you can turn the page over. So I wanted to begin with this. Some of you may have read this before. I think it's in his biography, but this was from the London Chronicle in September. If you remember in the overview, during World War I, Rav Kook got stuck in Great Britain during World War I, and so he had a relationship there, and he was now on a fundraising. He often went to Britain, to France, to fundraise through Europe and raise money for the Yishuv. And so this was on one of his trips in 1935. And somebody want to read this?
I will.
Okay.
When I lived in London, I would visit the National Gallery, and the paintings that I loved that most were those of Rembrandt. In my opinion, Rembrandt was a saint. When I first saw Rembrandt's paintings, they reminded me of the rabbinic statement about the creation of light. When God created light, it was so strong and luminous that it was possible to see from one end of the world to the other. And God feared that the wicked would make use of it. What did he do? He secreted it for the righteous in the world to come.
He secreted it.
He secreted it for the righteous in the world to come. But from time to time, there are great men whom God blesses with the vision of the hidden light. I believe Rembrandt was one of them, and the light of his paintings is that light which God created on Genesis Day.
Okay, we could probably spend the rest of the time talking about this, and maybe we will. We'll do another class on the rest of it. But there's so much in this paragraph. So help me unpack it. What's the overview? What's your first takeaway?
He appreciated art.
He appreciated art on a very
Holy level.
holy spiritual level. He appreciated art. Right? Again, like I said, he did not view the world just from inside. When I say inside the four walls of the Beit Midrash, just is it Torah? Is it not Torah? Is it is it good for the? But he was
viewing it through his own lens.
It was really for a very he was here's a good case of taking the whole and applying the kadosh to it. He saw in Rembrandt. Well, so first of all, the very fact that he could appreciate art, and he appreciated a lot of art, and he appreciated different types of art, but he was very taken with Rembrandt. Okay, so now what is it about Rembrandt? What does he do with it?
Is he calling Rembrandt a prophet? He says that he...
Saint probably was tzaddik, probably not prophet.
Okay.
But in the sense that he saw light
Or
what he's saying is that
chassid.
Rembrandt saw light through a lens other than just the vision of light. He saw it in the way that perhaps God intended it to be seen through creation.
Okay, what light is he talking about? So first of all, what was he? If you ever seen so?
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's speaking technically.
So let's clearly it starts with the technical, because if you ever seen a Rembrandt, what he does with light, is what made it, is what he's known for. Okay, so yes, but he goes way deeper than that. What Aggie? What is he saying? What is he referencing?
Well, how he paints it is the one thing, is the technical. The glow on the subjects, or how the subjects in the painting are illuminated, because many of them are Jewish themes as well. So then I don't know if he's getting caught up in the Jewish themes of many of Rembrandt's works, but how it kind of has an aura about it, because the light.
Okay, I like that word aura. So the very first thing is the paintings of Rembrandt deeply moved him. Right? Have you ever been deeply moved by a piece of art? Any of you? Whatever. There's some art that's deeply moving. So this deeply moved him. That's number one. Now think about it. He was able to be deeply moved by art, which is an aesthetic, right? An aesthetic, very physical, but it goes deeper. Again, I can speak for myself. What moved him was that Rembrandt was able to project an aura of this light. What light is he talking about?
I mean, the other thing is we take it for granted when we see works of art like that. They make it look easy. Like, you don't think of how in the world do you paint light. Like,
Right.
It's like the absence of you're painting something that you typically don't see. You know, you see something, light shown on it, but you don't see the light, or you don't feel the light. But
it's something more than just the light.
I think it's more than so.
Yeah,
When he talks, so what?
This is from.
So let me ask you a question. What
His
light is he
ability
talking?
as
What
an
light is he
artist
talking
to
about?
show
What?
it
He's
and-
talking about the light.
He said the
that was
creation
created
of
on the
light.
first day.
Is he?
Yeah. This is from a midrash.
So he's talking about Vayehi Or.
Right. But he's saying.
But
that-
light isn't Vayi Or. What's light? Light is the sun, the moon.
Yeah.
But he's not talking about
Uh-huh.
that. He's actually giving a shot, an interpretation of Vayi Or here, because that light we know couldn't have been. It's not the light of the sun or the moon. It's not. It's not
visible light.
photons.
It's
It's
not
not
visible
photons.
spectrum.
It's,
It's not the light of the visible spectrum. It's the energy.
So I would say no. See, that's my line. That's the physicist line.
Sorry.
That's the. No, I like. That's how I explain it. Is it was energy, or can be energy, right? Light is a form of energy. So I like to say that Vayi Or was the Big Bang. I don't think he's saying that.
He's saying that God blesses those that can visualize that light and put it on a canvas and convey it to others to give them that feeling of awe.
All right, I'm gonna go deep with it. I didn't intend to do this. I'm gonna go deeper because when he says this reminds of what light? This light was, huh?
He should have projected some Rembrandt.
Yeah, well, he's got a picture there, but look, just go by what he says. He says, they remind me of the rabbinic statement about the creation of light. When God created light, it was so strong and luminous that it was possible to see from one end of the world to the other. And God feared the wicked would make use of it. What did he do? He secreted it in the righteous for the righteous in the world to come. In my mind, this light is the glory of God. Not to sound too Christian about it. It's like to me, it's the light that shone from Moshe's face when he came down with the second set of the Luchot. That's the kind of light, right? A reflection of the divine. And he was worried that it could be perverted by those who might, people again, to tie the two together, the whole which kind of dampens holiness, which kind of can misappropriate holiness or not release it. He was worried about that because we talk about what the righteous, those who go to the world to come, Olam Haba, what are they doing? They're imbibing the glory of God, the light of God, God's face. So I think he's saying when he looks at a Rembrandt, he's seeing that kind of light, the divine light. Very powerful.
I think it must also have to do with the subject, because I've never been to the National Gallery, but I imagine there are plenty of pieces of art that convey light in an awe-inspiring way, but it might be of Jesus or some other, maybe Catholic painting, but Rembrandt painted so many Jewish things, so is it the combination?
That could all be true, but
Yeah.
if you want to parse Rav Kook, think about it. He's saying when he looks at a Rembrandt, he sees a semblance of that divine light. And he even takes it further. He says, from time to time, there are great men who God blesses with a vision of the hidden light, like Moshe, like maybe some of the other prophets, maybe Eliyahu, right? I believe Rembrandt was one of them. And the light of his paintings is that light which God created on Genesis Day. So you can go deep with that in terms of the intro, but the broader thing is he can speak about a Rembrandt the same way he could talk about Eliyahu HaNavi. And it didn't bother him.
He went into the museum in the first place and saw lots of things.
Correct. So again, it gives you a sense of that idea. And think about it. That is the perfect pair, and it's almost that pairing of Kodesh and Chol also. Right? The activity of putting paint on canvas that can elevate the human spirit and be a spiritual moment. Okay.
What does Rembrandt was a saint mean? What does Rembrandt was a saint mean?
I think it means he had an element of holiness to him. I think that that's how I interpret it. I don't have the. Again, there's no Hebrew here. He didn't write. This was his statement to some statement he must have made. Maybe he did write about it. I don't have the original in front of me, so I don't have the Hebrew to look at. I could probably try to find it. But
Saying this was
a saint, the true saint is either tzaddik or chassid, depending on how you utilize it. Pious, chassid, saint, probably tzaddik.
Okay, thanks.
I don't think navi is what a word he would have used, but maybe.
No.
But he says very explicitly that he viewed him as one of those whom God blessed with a vision of the hidden light.
Correct. So almost prophetic, yeah. So, but I just this paragraph to me is you could really get a lot out of it. Okay. So now, his view on science really was reflected in his statements mostly on in his time and place. Evolution was a big deal. Today, evolution is not a big deal for us observant Jews. For most of us, we've kind of gotten past evolution as being any kind of a problem. But in his time and place, it was still a very much Darwin was still being understood and taught, and so there was a lot of conflict over Torah and science, but particularly Torah and Darwinism in particular. So, but even though he's speaking about evolution, the way he approaches it is really kind of an overall approach to science and Torah. And I just wanted to take some time to look at how he parses it. So somebody else want to read? Or Kodesh?
I'll read it.
Okay.
The theory of evolution is increasingly conquering the world at this time, and more so than all other philosophical theories, conforms to the Kabbalistic secrets of the world. Evolution, which proceeds on a path of ascendancy, provides an optimistic foundation for the world. How is it possible to despair at a time when we see that everything evolves and ascends? When we penetrate the inner meaning of ascending evolution, we find in it the divine element shining with absolute brilliance. It's precisely the Ein Sof in Akdu, which manages to bring realization that which is Ein Sof in Potentia.
Okay. Anybody understand that yet? So what he is saying here is, unlike the Rambam and some others, he's not finding a conflict. We'll see later. He's not finding a conflict between Torah and scientific knowledge. He's of those that believe that there can't be that conflict. But what he wants to say is, when he uses this Kabbalistic idea of pursue the path of ascendancy, and then he evolves and ascends. This idea of evolve and ascends. What he wants to say is, our human knowledge is limited. As our knowledge grows, we will find that science, Torah, with more knowledge, what are we going to find? Convergence. That there's not, just like, again, that Kabbalistic idea of emanation, what emanates from God, right? It's the same idea, that there's a certain unity as we go down through the Sfirot. There's a certain unity that, again, I don't want to go too heavy into the Kabbalah tonight. But what he wants to say is, and by the way, that's exactly what we say today. Back then, evolution was a big problem in all of his theories. Today, I can tell you right now, 4 books that you could get right now. God in the Big Bang, God in Science, In the Beginning is another one. There's like all these books that talk about, and as I just mentioned, as physics and cosmology become more popular, the idea that when we understand light is energy goes beyond the spectrum of visible light. We have gamma rays, right? X-rays. What was the Big Bang? Was a release of gamma ray, right? And X-ray, right? That's what it was, and that's what Vayihi Or could have been, right? So it took decades to get from here to there, and now there's probably 6 different ways to resolve evolution and science and Torah. So his basic idea is, and by the way, he also, the second thing is the idea of when we understand it, or if we don't, we might is understanding it in actu, in the real world, kind of, versus how does that play out in my inner spiritual life, right? There's the world out there, and there's my inner spiritual life. The Ein Sof is actually, anybody know what the Ein Sof is? What does the word Ein Sof literally mean? No end. It's that God that I talked about we can't know. That idea of God that we can't fully understand.
The infinite.
The infinite, ineffable God, that's the Ein Sof in Kabbalah. Okay. So So let's go. And by the way, here, when we penetrate the inner meaning of ascending evolution, so when we really get to its essence, which we're not there yet, we find in it divine element shining with absolute brilliance. Again, you have this idea of light, bright light. When you get to its essence, what are you going to get to? You're going to get to the core. You're going to get to the glory of God. That's my addition to this. Okay, but that's why I put these next to each other. Okay. All right, so now one of the primary sources is there's these two letters. There was a whole series of letters, Igrot Hara'iyah, that he wrote. One of the main ones that deals with this is letter number 91. The other one is either 124 or 134. I'm not sure which one it is. I couldn't quite pin it down in the Hebrew, in the original. So we'll see. So one place it says 124, one place it says 134. Meanwhile, letter 91. Somebody else want to read?
I'll read.
Yes.
There is no contradiction whatsoever between the Torah and any of the world's scientific knowledge. We do not have to accept theories as certainties, no matter how widely accepted, for they are like blossoms that wither. Very soon, scientific knowledge will be further developed, and all of today's new theories will be derided and scorned. But the Word of God will endure forever.
Okay, so he's saying this same thing a little differently here. But there's some important information here, I think, or important insights here in the way he says it here, and we'll see more in a minute. He says, we don't have to accept theories as certainties. In other words, science...
Polish on the floor or something.
Shaking.
Is it just a truck going down Main
Well,
Street?
there's a truck over there, but there are people here. There's another meeting at 8:30.
Yeah, I have nothing.
Okay. So we have theories. In other words, we see this over and over again. There are scientific theories that, first of all, science tries to find, what we said last time, tries to find or math tries to find an answer to everything, right? But we have theories that today everybody accepts, tomorrow nobody accepts. We have theories that some people accept, some people don't. Again, it's this idea of they evolve and ascend, right? And so if something seems like it's in conflict today, hold on. If it seems like it's in conflict, either we don't have a broad enough knowledge, or that theory isn't really the right theory. So no matter how widely accepted, for they are like blossoms that wither, and we see this over. We look at before Copernicus, everyone thought the world was flat or whatever, right? So very soon, science will be further developed, and all of today's new theories will be derided and scorned. But the word of God will endure forever. Ultimately, that's interesting. In other words, he's trying to say, none of that should ever take away from your faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You can't, even if you can't figure it out, even if you can't find an answer for evolution, again, he's talking about evolution here, if we can't work it out, it's because we can't work it out. It's not because the Torah is wrong. And then he's going to go on to say his whole view of the Torah was that's not the purpose of the Torah anyway. The Torah's purpose isn't to resolve evolution. If that was the case, it would have been written very differently. That's not our problem. That's in actual and internally. Ultimately, it doesn't matter, and that'll all work itself out. Just give it time. Okay, it continues, Aggie.
Even if it were clear to us that the order of creation was through the evolution of the species, there would still be no contradiction.
Okay, even if the theory of evolution is proven, which pretty much it has been on some level.
Hasn't been disproven.
Okay, hasn't been. Okay, there you go. That's exactly hasn't been disproven. Okay, that's what he would say.
To calculate time according to the literal sense of the biblical verses, which is far more relevant to us than his ancient history. The Torah obviously obscures the account of creation and speaks in allusions and parables. Everyone knows that the account of creation is part of the secrets of the Torah. And if all these statements were taken literally, what secrets would there be? The essence of the Genesis narrative is the knowledge of God and a truly moral life.
Okay, what's he saying in this paragraph? Certainly at the end of it.
Don't look at Genesis as science or history. Look
But
at it as the parable to give you the knowledge of God and to live a moral life.
Right. In other words, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. What is the important part of the Genesis story? What's the key part? What's the only important part of the Genesis story?
The role of God.
There's a prime mover, and he is God. That there is a God, and as prime mover, He sets the moral agenda. And we're obligating that moral agenda. That's ultimately the only purpose and reason for the Genesis story. And, by the way, in order for God to be God, there has to be mystery there. Yes, it's a mystery. It's intended to be a mystery. It's intended not to be clear. It's intended to be beyond us. It doesn't mean we don't look for that. We don't try or strive to understand it. If that were the case, there'd be no Torah study. We'd be, it'd be a catechism, and we'd all be Catholic. But that's not what we're intended to be. We're intended to struggle with it, intended to try to answer it. But trying to answer it and trying to resolve the mysteries, trying to understand the mysteries of the Torah, is not the goal unto itself. It's to understand that we're trying to understand these mysteries because we want to understand God. Right? That's what Moshe wanted. Horeini na et kvo. What did he say? He didn't say, Horeini na et kvodecha. Show me your glory. I'm coming back. That's why I use that term. Show me your glory. In other words, I want the ultimate Rembrandt experience. Think about it. That's what he was saying, Moshe. What Rav Kook felt for a moment looking at a Rembrandt, Moshe wanted that in reality. Show me that divine light. And he got enough of it that reflected off of him. He came down and he had to put a mask on. That's right. And it was still a mystery. God said still, you can't know it all. There's still, even from you, Moshe, there's still a mystery here. And that's the idea. And by the way, if there's no mystery, if I could look at a Rembrandt and really totally see the technical technique of it, it would lose it wouldn't have that emotional impact, would it? It wouldn't have that spiritual impact, I don't think.
It could.
I think it still would. Right. If you had the artistic knowledge to appreciate all the technique, you would still, I think you would actually be more in awe because you would then understand what it took to do it.
And still not be able to, but there's still a mystery there because now maybe there's a handful of people that could do what Rembrandt did. But you can know the technique, you can understand the technique, you can even create something similar, but there's still, you're not a Rembrandt. How many Rembrandts are there? There's still a mystery there. How did he do it? How did he do it? There's still a mystery. I know all the pieces, I know all the parts. How did he do it? I can know exactly how Houdini does one of his tricks, but how did he do it? It was a lot of physical exertion to what he did beyond the trickery. So this idea of there being some kind of a mystery. Okay. Finally, the last one, you might as well do the next paragraph if you don't mind.
In general, this is an important principle in the conflict of ideas, that when an idea comes to negate some teaching in the Torah, we must not to begin with reject it, but build the edifice of the Torah above it, and thereby we ascend higher, and through this ascent, the ideas are clear.
So again, we have to say, by the way, in a way, it pushes things. In other words, if we say, if it's not in harmony yet with Torah, then we have to say, what do we say? So what he's saying is you don't reject it. What some would say is, if it's not in harmony with Torah, I reject it. He's saying, no. Have fealty to the Torah. And if I have fealty to the Torah and I understand science only ends here, but Torah takes me there, I'm here, then what do I need? It forces this, but I still believe it forces it to go further until I can understand how it does fit with Torah. And by the way, it's easy. It's easy when you're talking about the physical sciences. It's easy. How could God create the laws of gravity and say gravity is again? The laws, the physical sciences. They're physical sciences. If God created the world, He had to create those. It's the other sciences that are a little more harder, are more difficult to bring into harmony. But you see this idea of He talks first about evolution and ascendancy. In its last paragraph, what you see is something even more important. If you have faith, and you stick by that faith, you don't lose it, it forces you to find the answer. Or to say, it just hasn't, somebody's going to find that answer, but it's not a problem for me. I don't have to worry about it. Honestly, if in my mind I can't resolve the age of the universe with my Torah belief, right? Then it's not important. It's not a cause for me to give up my faith. It's got to be that's not the most important question. And that's what he's trying to say. All right, so as a summary, so I have a few minutes. So as a summary, so what I did was, this was written by, I forgot to put the author's name down. I apologize. So this was kind of a, because I knew this was going to be very difficult, so I wanted to give you something. So this is kind of a summary of what we just covered. So let's go through it kind of quickly. I'll just read it. So in a letter written in 1905 from Rav Kook, responding to questions concerning evolution, the geological age of the world, he put forth 4 basic arguments. So this is in this letter that we read sections of. Even to the ancients, it was well known that there were many periods that preceded our counting of nearly 6,000 years of the current age. Right? According to Midrash, God built worlds and destroyed them. Some say the word Bereshit means it's come the word Barashit. He built 6, that there were 6 worlds prior to this world. God created worlds and destroyed them. One answer for evolution is what we find, the fossils that we find are remnants from previous creations. You like it? Great. You don't like it? Find another answer. Okay? So, but he says God built and destroyed worlds before he created the universe as we know it. Even more astonishing, the Zohar states that there existed other human races in addition to the Adam who is mentioned in the Torah. So it's not unique to modern science or to Darwin that there was something before. Even the Midrash implies it. We must be careful not to regard current scientific theories as proven facts, even if they are widely accepted. Scientists are constantly raising new ideas, and all the scientific explanations of our time may very well come to be laughed at in the future as imaginative drivel. The fundamental belief of the Torah is that God created and governs the universe. The means and methods by which he acts, regardless of their complexity, are all tools of God, whose wisdom is infinite. Sometimes we specifically mention these intermediate processes, and sometimes we simply say God formed or God created, right? General statement. So God created. The process how he created, don't know, don't care, maybe. How he formed, don't know, not important. The things that are important, he gives us the details. Right? Like the fact that it tells us, like, make a tree that has a fruit tree bearing fruit that says tree bearing fruit. That information was important for us to learn the messages of what it meant that the earth sinned by not creating the kind of fruit tree that God had asked it to do. So we have that detail because we learned something from it. The rest of it, apparently, there was nothing for us to really learn from. Maybe it took 1,000 years or 2, but it didn't matter, or a few millennia. It doesn't matter. For example, it's written in the Bible about the house that King Solomon built. The Torah does not go into detail of Solomon speaking with his advisors, who in turn gave instructions to the architects, who gave the plans to the craftsmen, who managed to organize the actual building of the work. It's not to say Solomon built. The rest is understood and is not important. So too, if God, not by the way, not true by the building of the Mishkan. Building a Mishkan, I could have said, right, V'shchanti, Mishkan, Vasili Mikdash, V'shchanti B'tocham. Make for me a sanctuary, I will dwell in your midst, and we could have skipped the next the rest of Shemot. Could have ended Shemot right there. And next thing was they were, Shmini, Parsha Shmini. On the 8th day they consecrated the Mishkan. Apparently, it was important for us to know all about the menorah and the aron and the shulchan. That was important. So the Torah gave us those details over and over again. But at that point, when Solomon came to build the temple, we knew all that. Solomon built, boom, done. None of the details. Is not important. So too, if God created life via the laws of evolution, these are details irrelevant to the Torah's main message. The ethical teaching of a world formed and governed by an involved creator. That's what's important. The Torah concealed much with regard to the process of creation, speaking in parables and ciphers. Creation, referred to as Ma'aseh Bereshit by the Kabbalists, clearly belongs to the esoteric part of Torah. If the Torah's account of creation is meant to be understood literally, what are its profound secrets? If everything is openly revealed, what is left to be explained in the future? God limits revelations, even from the most brilliant and sublime prophets, according to the ability of that generation to absorb the information. For every idea and concept, there is significance to the hour of its disclosure. Maybe God wants us to parse it out and figure it out. And one generation needs it, and the next generation maybe doesn't. For example, if knowledge of the rotation of the earth on its axis around the sun had been revealed to primitive man, his courage and initiative may have been severely retarded by fear of falling. Why attempt to build tall buildings on top of an immense ball churning and whizzing through space at high speeds? only after certain intellectual maturity and scientific understanding about gravity and other compensating forces were human beings ready for this knowledge. The same is true regarding spiritual and moral ideas. The Jewish people struggled greatly to explain the concept of divine providence to the pagan world. This was not an easy idea to market. Of what interest should the actions of an insignificant human be to the creator of the universe? Belief in the transcendental importance of our actions is a central principle in Judaism. It was disseminated throughout the world by her daughter religions. But if mankind had already been aware of the true dimensions of the cosmos and the relatively tiny world that we inhabit, could this fundamental concept of Torah have had a chance in spreading? Only now that we have greater confidence in our power and control of the forces of nature is awareness of the grandiose scale of the universe not an impediment to these basic ethical values. So this is how he saw it. He saw that everything had to come in its own time, this idea of evolution and ascendancy. All right.
Just have a quick question. Where does
Yes.
he fit chronologically with like Yeshiva University and Torah Madaf? I mean, which came? I mean, he's not the father of that. Does
No,
that-
somewhat parallel to it.
And I could look up.
Somewhat parallel to it, but from a different,
He
very
was the only-
much more
he wasn't the only
Kabbalistic.
one who.
Again, the more I study Rav Kook, I understand why he and Rav Soloveitchik are so often in the same sentence,
Yeah.
because they're very similar. All right, thank you all.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Bless you. Thank you.